Every year, hunters vanish without a trace. Camps are torn apart, equipment left behind, and stories whispered through trees that no one can quite explain. But sometimes the silence isn't natural, it's planned. Unexplained lights appear deep in remote terrain, far from any roads or air traffic. People re-emerge days later with no memory, or not at all, and what some call wilderness, others call the dead zone. In this video, we explore 6 full-length wilderness encounters where the threat may not have been from this earth. From mysterious aircraft sightings in the Arctic to strange lights reported by hunters in Appalachia, expect stories where logic falters and the woods go silent. The Copperthread River region near Tok, Alaska, had always been prime moose country, with its maze of willows, spruce stands, and highland meadows that stretched endlessly toward the Canadian border. The area earned its name from early gold prospectors who measured distances along the river, and by 2025, it remained one of the most remote and wildlife-rich regions in eastern Alaska. 3 seasoned hunters had chosen this wilderness specifically for its reputation as a moose haven, planning to scout the terrain months ahead of the fall hunting season. Garrett Harlan, a 43-year-old machinist from Anchorage, had been hunting Alaska's backcountry for over 2 decades. His weathered hands showed the calluses of a man who worked with tools both in the shop and in the wilderness. Miles Dufresne, 39, owned a small outfitting business in Fairbanks and knew the Copperthread country better than most. The third member of their group, Toby Grantham, was 51 and had served 2 tours in Afghanistan before returning to Alaska to work on the pipeline. All 3 men carried themselves with the quiet confidence that comes from years of experience in dangerous country. They had arrived at their chosen campsite on June 24, 2025, parking their ATVs at the end of an old trapper trail that wound through dense alder thickets. The spot they selected sat on a slight rise overlooking a series of beaver ponds, perfect for glassing moose during the early morning and evening hours. Garrett had insisted on the location because he had spotted fresh wallows the previous summer, and the men were eager to pattern the local bull moose before the September hunt. Their camp setup followed standard protocol for bear country. The cook tent stood 30 yards downwind from their sleeping area, with all food stored in bear-proof containers. Miles had brought his usual arsenal of deterrents, including bear bangers, flare shells, and a can of bear spray, while each man carried a sidearm. Garrett trusted his .45-70 government rifle, a lever-action Marlin that had served him well on previous hunts. Toby preferred his 10mm Glock, loaded with hard-cast bullets designed for dangerous game. The first 2 days passed without incident. The men glassed several cow moose with calves and documented promising signs along game trails. They discovered fresh rubs on birch trees and noted the locations of active wallows. Garrett commented that the moose population appeared healthy, with good age structure among the bulls they observed from a distance. On the evening of June 26th, the 3 hunters retired to their respective tents around 11 o'clock. The summer sun had only recently set, leaving the wilderness in the pale twilight that characterizes Alaska's interior during late June. Miles mentioned hearing something moving through the brush earlier, but dismissed it as likely moose activity. None of the men were particularly concerned, as they had camped in similar locations dozens of times without problems. At approximately 2:30 in the morning, their peaceful sleep was shattered by the sound of ripping fabric and crashing metal. A massive male grizzly bear had torn through their cook tent like tissue paper, scattering pots and pans across the campsite. The animal, later estimated at over 600 pounds, had been drawn to the area by the lingering scent of their evening meal despite their careful food storage practices. Toby was the first to react, rolling out of his sleeping bag and reaching for his .45-70 rifle. The Grizzly had already turned its attention to the sleeping area, and Toby barely managed to work the lever action before the bear was upon him. The massive animal swatted him aside with a single blow, sending him tumbling across the rocky ground. His rifle discharged harmlessly into the air as he crashed against a birch tree. Garrett emerged from his tent to find chaos. The bear had Toby pinned and was making huffing sounds that every experienced hunter recognized as extreme aggression. Without hesitation, Garrett fired a bear banger from his flare gun, sending a bright explosion over the animal's head. The Grizzly hesitated, giving Toby precious seconds to crawl away from the immediate danger. Miles had armed himself with his 10mm pistol and positioned himself near the fire pit. He shouted at the bear while firing a flare shell that burst in brilliant red light above the campsite. The combination of noise, light, and human voices caused the Grizzly to retreat approximately 50 yards, but it did not leave the area entirely. For the next 5 minutes, the three hunters maintained their defensive positions while the bear circled their camp. They could hear it moving through the brush, occasionally stopping to test the air with its sensitive nose. Miles fired his second flare shell when the animal approached too closely, and Garrett prepared another bear banger. The situation reached its climax when the Grizzly made a second charge, this time directly at Miles. The experienced outfitter stood his ground and emptied his 10mm pistol, placing several rounds into the bear's chest and shoulder. The heavy bullets finally convinced the wounded animal to retreat, and they heard it crashing through the alders as it disappeared into the night. All three men survived the encounter, though Toby suffered severe bruising to his ribs and a twisted ankle that would require him to use a cane for several months. The experience fundamentally changed their approach to camping in bear country. They never again left any scented items outside their bear-proof containers, and they began carrying additional deterrents, including air horns and extra flare shells. Toby Grantham never returned to the Alaskan wilderness after that night, choosing instead to pursue his hunting closer to civilization. Garrett and Miles continued their annual scouting trips, but they never forgot the lesson that even the most experienced hunters can become complacent, and in grizzly country, that complacency can prove fatal. The Barrage National Forest in north-central Idaho had earned its reputation as premier elk hunting territory through decades of careful wildlife management and rugged terrain that kept casual hunters at bay. Stretching across 1.8 million acres of dense timber and steep canyon country, the forest provided ideal habitat for Roosevelt elk during the fall rutting season. The area near Pierce, Idaho, had been logged extensively in the early 1900s, creating a patchwork of mature timber and regenerating clear cuts that elk favored for feeding and bedding. Donnie Phelps, a 42-year-old electrician from Coeur d'Alene, had drawn his first rifle elk tag after years of applying through Idaho's controlled hunt system. He decided to bring his 17-year-old son, Tyler Phelps, on what would serve as both a hunting trip and a rite of passage. Donnie had been hunting white-tailed deer for 20 years, but elk represented a different challenge entirely. The massive animals required specialized knowledge of their behavior, habitat preferences, and the physical conditioning necessary to hunt the steep mountain terrain they preferred. Father and son arrived at their chosen trailhead on October 11, 1998, loaded with backpacks containing enough supplies for a week-long backcountry hunt. Donnie carried a .300 Winchester Magnum rifle topped with a variable power scope, while Tyler served as the designated spotter with a quality pair of binoculars. Their packs contained freeze-dried meals, sleeping bags rated for cold weather, and emergency supplies including a first aid kit and signal mirror. The pair established their base camp 3 miles from the nearest road, positioning themselves on a ridgeline that offered views of multiple drainage systems. The location provided access to fresh water from a small creek and enough flat ground for their 2-person tent. Donnie had selected the spot after studying topographical maps and consulting with local hunters who had success in the area during previous seasons. Their first day produced encouraging signs. The forest echoed with the haunting bugles of mature bulls, calling to cows during the peak of rutting activity. Tyler spotted fresh elk tracks in the soft earth near their water source, and Donnie discovered several rubs where bulls had polished their antlers against small trees. The abundant signs suggested a healthy elk population, and both hunters felt optimistic about their chances. The second day brought subtle changes that initially escaped their notice. The forest seemed quieter than expected for peak rutting season, with fewer bugles echoing through the timber. Tyler mentioned that he had heard something moving around their tent during the night, but Donnie attributed the sounds to normal wildlife activity. When they returned to camp that evening, Tyler noticed that his spare hunting gloves were missing from where he had left them drying on a log. The morning of October 13th revealed more disturbing evidence. Clear paw prints in the soft earth around their tent showed that a large predator had been investigating their campsite. The tracks measured approximately 4 inches long with 4 toes and no claw marks, distinctly different from the 5-toed tracks that black bears would have left. Donnie recognized the prints as belonging to a mountain lion, also known as a cougar or puma. The realization that a cougar had been circling their camp created an entirely new level of concern. Unlike bears, which typically avoided human contact, mountain lions occasionally viewed humans as potential prey, particularly when the cats were young or desperate. Donnie explained to Tyler that cougars were ambush predators that preferred to attack from above or behind, using their powerful hind legs to leap onto their victim's back. At dawn, Tyler was hiking alone to a glassing position when he spotted movement in his peripheral vision. Behind a fallen log barely 30 feet away, an adult cougar crouched in perfect stalking position. The cat's muscles were coiled for a spring, and its yellow eyes remained fixed on Tyler with predatory intensity. The teenager froze, remembering his father's instructions about avoiding sudden movements when encountering dangerous wildlife. Tyler called out to his father in a controlled voice, never taking his eyes off the cougar. Donnie arrived within seconds and immediately recognized the threat. He fired his .300 Winchester Magnum into the air, producing a sharp crack that echoed through the forest. The cougar flinched at the sound but initially held its position, demonstrating the confidence of an apex predator. Only when Donnie fired a second warning shot did the mountain lion retreat, bounding up the steep slope with fluid grace. However, the animal did not leave the area entirely. Throughout the remainder of the day, both hunters caught glimpses of movement in the timber and heard the distinctive sound of something large moving parallel to their position. The stalking behavior continued for 2 more days. The cougar had apparently been tracking them, possibly attracted by their cow-elk calls or simply viewing them as potential prey. Donnie realized that the cat had been watching them far longer than they had been aware of its presence, studying their routines and waiting for an opportunity to attack. Father and son packed their gear and hiked out on October 15th, abandoning their elk hunt with 3 days remaining on their tags. The experience had a profound impact on both hunters, particularly Tyler, who struggled with anxiety about returning to the wilderness. Donnie continued hunting, but never again in cougar country without additional hunters in his group. The encounter served as a stark reminder that in mountain lion territory, hunters were not always the apex predators they imagined themselves to be. The Skarnheim Peaks of central Norway represented some of Europe's most pristine wilderness, with peaks reaching over 8,000 feet and glacial valleys that remained largely unchanged since the last ice age. The region's name translates to Home of the Giants in Norse mythology, reflecting the imposing landscape of rocky peaks, deep lakes, and extensive plateaus. During the late spring of 1983, the mountains still held substantial snowpack at higher elevations, creating dangerous conditions for anyone caught in sudden weather changes. Hans Olaf Nystad, a 54-year-old carpenter from Lillehammer, had been making annual solo hunting trips to the Skarnheim region for over 15 years. His target species was wild reindeer, which migrated through the area during late spring and early summer months. The Norwegian government strictly regulated reindeer hunting, and Hans possessed one of the limited permits issued for the 1983 season. His experience in the mountains had earned him a reputation among local hunters as someone who could handle the challenging terrain and unpredictable weather conditions. Hans began his hunting trip on May 18, 1983, hiking from the village of Gendesheim toward the shores of Lake Mardal. The area offered excellent reindeer hunting due to the animal's predictable migration routes and the sparse human presence. Hans carried a Mauser rifle chambered in 6.5 by 55 mm Swedish, a cartridge favored by Scandinavian hunters for its accuracy and effectiveness on medium-sized game. His pack contained enough supplies for 10 days, including dried fish, hardtack, and a small tent designed for mountain conditions. Weather conditions appeared favorable when Hans established his hunting camp near the eastern shore of Lake Mardal. The spring had been unusually dry, with many of the seasonal streams running lower than normal. Hans selected a campsite that provided shelter from prevailing winds while offering good visibility across the lake and surrounding slopes. His years of experience had taught him to read the subtle signs that indicated approaching weather changes, but the immediate forecast seemed stable. The first 3 days of hunting produced excellent opportunities. Hans spotted several small herds of reindeer moving along traditional migration routes, and he was able to harvest a mature bull on the morning of May 21st. The successful hunt required him to spend considerable time field dressing the animal and preparing the meat for transport. Hans had planned to begin his return journey the following morning, satisfied with his hunting success and eager to return home. However, during the night of May 21st, unexpected weather struck the Skarnheim region. A low-pressure system moved in from the North Sea, bringing heavy rainfall that continued for over 12 hours. The dry conditions that had characterized the spring meant that the ground could not absorb the sudden influx of water. Streams that had been mere trickles became raging torrents, and the normally placid waters of Lake Mardal rose several feet above their normal levels. Hans awoke to find his campsite surrounded by rapidly rising water. The small stream that had provided his water source had become a dangerous river, cutting off his planned return route. A rock slide triggered by the saturated ground had blocked the alternate trail he might have used to reach higher ground. His satellite communication device had been damaged by water seepage, leaving him unable to contact rescue services. Recognizing the severity of his situation, Hans constructed a lean-to shelter using materials from his damaged tent and natural materials found in the area. His carpentry skills proved invaluable as he created a structure that provided protection from the continuing rain while keeping him elevated above the floodwaters. The reindeer meat he had harvested became his primary food source, supplemented by the emergency rations he carried in his pack. On the night of May 24th, Hans encountered an unexpected and disturbing development. A small pack of wolves appeared at the edge of his campsite, drawn by the scent of the reindeer meat. The presence of wolves in the Skarnheim region was highly unusual, as the species had been largely eliminated from southern Norway decades earlier. Hans suspected that these animals had migrated from populations in northern Sweden or Finland, possibly following the same reindeer herds he had been hunting. The wolves demonstrated no fear of human presence, circling his shelter and testing his defenses. Hans counted at least 4 individual animals, including what appeared to be a mature alpha male with distinctive markings. The pack showed signs of hunger and desperation, suggesting they had been following the reindeer migration for some time without successful hunting opportunities. Hans spent 2 sleepless nights maintaining a defensive position. He kept a large fire burning continuously, using deadfall wood that he gathered during daylight hours. When the wolves approached too closely, he fired warning shots from his Mauser rifle, but the animals showed little fear of the gunshots. The pack members took turns testing different approaches to his shelter, demonstrating the coordinated hunting behavior that made wolves such effective predators. The psychological strain of the situation proved as challenging as the physical hardships. Hans had to remain constantly alert, unable to sleep for more than brief periods. The combination of isolation, dangerous weather, and predator pressure created stress levels that tested his mental resilience. He later reported that the wolves' eyes reflected his firelight throughout the night, creating an atmosphere of constant menace. On May 27th, the floodwaters finally began to recede, revealing the extent of the damage to the local landscape. Hans discovered that his original escape route remained blocked by debris, but an alternate path had been cleared by the receding water. The wolves had disappeared sometime during the previous night, possibly following other game or simply moving on to new territory. Hans completed his journey out of the mountains on May 28th, exhausted but unharmed. Local authorities expressed surprise at his account of the wolf encounter, as no confirmed wolf sightings had been reported in the region for over 30 years. The incident prompted increased wildlife monitoring in the area, though no additional wolf activity was documented that year. The experience fundamentally changed Hans's approach to solo hunting in remote areas. The Blackwood Federal Wilderness in Michigan's Upper Peninsula encompasses nearly 1 million acres of dense hardwood and coniferous forests, interspersed with countless lakes, rivers, and streams that provide ideal habitat for black bears. The forest's remote location, bordered by Lake Superior to the north and Wisconsin to the west, attracted serious hunters seeking challenging terrain and minimal human interference. During the early 2000s, the area maintained healthy black bear populations that supported limited hunting opportunities through a strict permit system. Wade Garrison, a 38-year-old mechanical engineer from Grand Rapids, had drawn his first black bear tag after years of applying through Michigan's lottery system. His younger brother, Elijah Garrison, 34, worked as a forest ranger in the Lower Peninsula and possessed extensive knowledge of bear behavior and habitat preferences. The brothers had planned their hunting trip as both a scouting expedition for the upcoming fall season and an opportunity to spend time together in the wilderness they both loved. The Garrison brothers arrived at their chosen hunting area on August 2, 2006, accessing the remote location via a network of old logging roads that required four-wheel drive vehicles to navigate safely. Their destination was a secluded valley approximately 12 miles from the nearest maintained road, where Elijah had identified promising bear sign during previous reconnaissance trips. The area featured a combination of mature hardwood forests, dense thickets, and small clearings that provided ideal bear habitat. Their campsite was positioned near an abandoned logging road that had been reclaimed by nature over the previous decade. The location offered several advantages, including access to fresh water from a small creek, natural windbreaks provided by mature trees, and sufficient flat ground for their tent. Wade had brought his compound bow for the hunting season, while Elijah carried a 12-gauge shotgun loaded with slug rounds as protection against dangerous encounters. The first 2 days of scouting produced encouraging results. The brothers located fresh bear tracks along game trails, discovered several trees that showed claw marks from bears climbing for nuts and berries, and found evidence of daybeds where bears had rested during hot afternoon hours. Elijah's professional experience helped him identify the most promising areas for setting up hunting blinds during the actual season. On the evening of August 4th, Wade and Elijah were sitting around their campfire discussing their observations and planning the next day's activities. The fire provided light and warmth as temperatures dropped with the setting sun, and both brothers were relaxed after a successful day of scouting. They had consumed a simple meal of canned soup and crackers, followed by coffee and quiet conversation about their hunting strategies. At approximately 10:30 p.m., Elijah noticed movement beyond the circle of firelight. His ranger training had taught him to recognize the subtle signs of wildlife activity, and he initially assumed that a bear had been attracted to their campsite by food odors. He quietly alerted Wade and reached for the shotgun they kept readily accessible near their chairs. However, what emerged from the darkness was not a bear, but a human figure. A woman appeared at the edge of their campsite, moving with uncertain steps and appearing disoriented. She appeared to be in her early 40s with long, dark hair that was tangled and dirty. Her clothing consisted of a torn flannel shirt and jeans that showed signs of extended exposure to the elements. Most disturbing was her lack of footwear, as she walked barefoot across the rough forest floor without apparent discomfort. The woman's behavior was immediately concerning to both brothers. She mumbled incoherently when they attempted to speak with her, showing no recognition of their presence or questions. Her eyes appeared unfocused, and she seemed to be responding to stimuli that the brothers could not perceive. Wade offered her water from their supply, but she showed no interest in drinking. Elijah attempted to determine if she was injured or suffering from exposure, but she would not allow him to examine her. The brothers spent several hours trying to communicate with the mysterious woman, but she remained unresponsive to their efforts. She would not sit by the fire despite the cool night air, and she refused all offers of food or assistance. Her behavior suggested possible mental illness, drug use, or severe trauma, but the brothers could not determine the cause of her condition. Wade suggested that they should attempt to lead her back to their vehicle and transport her to medical care, but the woman would not follow them when they tried to guide her toward the logging road. She seemed content to remain at the edge of their campsite, occasionally mumbling words that neither brother could understand. Elijah considered using his satellite phone to contact emergency services, but the remote location made rescue operations extremely difficult. The brothers took turns staying awake throughout the night, monitoring the woman's condition and ensuring she did not wander away from their campsite. They were concerned about her safety in the wilderness, particularly given her apparent mental state and lack of proper clothing or equipment. The temperature dropped significantly during the night, and they worried about hypothermia or other exposure-related injuries. When morning arrived on August 5th, the brothers discovered that the woman had vanished completely. During the brief period when both brothers had dozed off near dawn, exhausted from their vigilant watch, she had slipped away silently into the forest. A thorough search of the surrounding area revealed faint footprints leading away from the campsite that disappeared into the dense underbrush. The soft earth around their campsite showed their own boot prints clearly, along with some bare footprints that seemed to fade as they moved farther from the camp. Wade and Elijah packed their gear and returned to town immediately, where they reported the incident to local law enforcement. The sheriff's department searched the area but found no evidence of the woman's presence. No missing person reports had been filed that matched her description, and no other hunters or campers in the area reported similar encounters. The brothers never returned to that particular valley for hunting, despite the excellent bear sign they had discovered. The incident left them both unsettled, wondering about the woman's fate and questioning whether they could have done more to help her. The incident remained unexplained, and both brothers found themselves questioning what they had actually witnessed during their time in the Blackwood Federal Wilderness. The Crowsmire National Reserve in southeastern British Columbia represented some of Canada's most spectacular wilderness, with towering peaks, glacial valleys, and pristine alpine lakes that provided ideal habitat for large game animals. The reserve's 1,406 square kilometers encompass diverse ecosystems ranging from montane forests to alpine tundra, supporting healthy populations of moose, elk, and mountain goats. During September 2014, the area was experiencing peak rutting season for moose, making it an ideal time for hunters to pursue these massive animals in adjacent hunting zones. Randy McCormick, a 45-year-old plumber from Calgary, had been applying for limited entry moose tags through British Columbia's hunting draw system for over a decade. His persistence finally paid off when he drew a coveted tag for the hunting zone immediately adjacent to Crowsmire National Reserve. Randy invited his longtime friend Travis Howell, a 37-year-old accountant from Edmonton, to join him as his hunting partner. Both men had extensive experience hunting white-tailed deer and elk, but neither had previously hunted moose. The friends arrived at their hunting area on September 16, 2014, establishing a base camp in the Marble Canyon region, where alpine valleys provided excellent moose habitat. Randy carried a .300 Winchester Magnum rifle equipped with a variable power scope, while Travis served as the primary spotter with high-quality binoculars and a spotting scope. Their hunting strategy focused on locating moose during early morning and evening hours when the animals were most active. The terrain they hunted was characterized by steep-sided valleys, dense stands of lodgepole pine and spruce, and numerous beaver ponds that attracted moose for feeding and drinking. The area had been subject to natural forest fires in previous decades, creating a mosaic of mature timber and regenerating clear cuts that provided ideal browse for moose. Randy had researched the area extensively, studying topographical maps and consulting with local outfitters about moose behavior and habitat preferences. September 18th dawned clear and cold, with temperatures dropping below freezing during the pre-dawn hours. The hunters were positioned on a ridgeline overlooking a series of beaver ponds by 5:30 a.m., hoping to spot moose moving to water for their morning drink. The crisp air carried sounds clearly, and both hunters could hear the distinctive grunting calls of bull moose echoing through the valley below them. At approximately 7:15 a.m., Travis spotted a massive bull moose feeding in the willows near the largest beaver pond. The animal appeared to be a mature bull with a full set of antlers that Travis estimated at over 50 inches in spread. The moose was approximately 800 yards away, requiring a careful stalk to get within Randy's effective shooting range. The hunters studied the terrain carefully, planning their approach to take advantage of natural cover and wind direction. However, as they began their descent toward the valley floor, both hunters noticed signs that the bull moose was already agitated. The animal was thrashing its antlers against small trees and making aggressive posturing displays that suggested high levels of testosterone and territorial behavior. Travis mentioned that the moose's behavior seemed more aggressive than normal, possibly indicating that other hunters in the area had been using cow calls to attract bulls. The hunters' approach required them to cross a small clearing approximately 200 yards from the moose's position. Randy moved first, using a large deadfall log as cover, while Travis maintained visual contact with the bull through his binoculars. The moose appeared to be focused on feeding and had not detected their presence. Randy signaled to Travis that he was ready to continue the stalk. As Travis stepped over a fallen branch, the dry wood snapped with a sharp crack that echoed across the valley. The bull moose immediately raised its massive head and turned in their direction. The animal's body language changed instantly from feeding behavior to full alert status, with its ears forward and nostrils flaring as it tested the air for scent. What happened next caught both hunters completely off guard. Instead of fleeing as most moose would when detecting human presence, the bull immediately charged up the steep slope toward their position. The animal moved with surprising speed for its size, covering the 200-yard distance in less than 30 seconds. Its massive antlers were lowered in an aggressive posture, and it was making loud grunting sounds that indicated extreme agitation. Travis attempted to move to higher ground but tripped over a rock and fell backward, striking his ribs against a fallen log. The impact knocked the wind out of him and left him unable to move quickly. Randy shouted warnings at the approaching moose while fumbling with his rifle, but the animal's charge was too rapid for him to acquire a proper shooting position. The bull moose closed to within 20 feet of the hunters before Randy managed to discharge his rifle. The shot was fired into the ground as a deterrent rather than aimed at the animal, but the loud report and muzzle blast caused the moose to halt its charge. The massive bull stood motionless for several seconds, breathing heavily and studying the hunters with what appeared to be calculating intelligence. Randy worked the bolt of his rifle and prepared for a second shot while Travis slowly got to his feet, favoring his bruised ribs. The moose snorted loudly, pawed the ground with its front hooves, and then turned and trotted back down the slope toward the beaver pond. The entire encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes, but both hunters felt as though they had aged several years. Travis suffered bruised ribs that required medical attention when they returned to town, though no bones were broken. Randy's hands shook for several hours after the encounter, and he was unable to concentrate on hunting for the remainder of their trip. Neither hunter filled their tag that year, choosing instead to return home early and process their experience. The incident served as a dramatic reminder that during rutting season, bull moose could be extremely dangerous and unpredictable. Both hunters continued their hunting pursuits but developed a much greater respect for the power and potential aggression of large game animals. The story became a cautionary tale they shared with other hunters about the importance of understanding animal behavior and maintaining situational awareness. The Blue Ridge Mountains along the Tennessee-North Carolina border had been home to subsistence hunters for over 2 centuries, with dense forests that provided excellent habitat for white-tailed deer, black bears, and wild turkeys. The Maplewood area, located near the entrance to what would become Blue Ridge National Park, featured steep hollows, rushing streams, and ancient hardwood forests that remained largely unchanged since Cherokee times. During the early 1970s, the region still attracted serious hunters despite increasing development and tourism pressure. Jerry Morton, a 39-year-old Vietnam veteran, had returned to his native Tennessee after completing 2 tours of duty in Southeast Asia. His military experience had taught him advanced skills in wilderness survival, navigation, and tracking that translated well to hunting in the challenging Appalachian terrain. Jerry worked as a construction foreman in Gatlinburg, but spent most of his free time pursuing his passion for bow hunting, preferring the challenge and solitude it provided compared to rifle hunting. Cliff Danvers, Jerry's hunting partner, was a 42-year-old local who had grown up in the Maplewood area and possessed intimate knowledge of the region's geography and wildlife patterns. Cliff had been hunting the same hollows and ridges for over 20 years, and he served as Jerry's guide to the best hunting locations. The two men had developed a friendship based on their shared love of the outdoors and their respect for traditional hunting methods. On November 7, 1971, Jerry and Cliff established their hunting camp in a secluded hollow approximately 4 miles from the nearest road. The location provided access to multiple deer trails and featured a small stream that provided fresh water. Jerry carried his custom-built recurve bow with cedar arrows tipped with broadheads he had crafted himself. Both hunters preferred the quiet approach that archery hunting required, as it allowed them to observe wildlife behavior without the disturbance caused by firearms. The first 2 days of hunting produced several close encounters with mature white-tailed bucks, though neither hunter achieved a clean shot opportunity. Jerry demonstrated the patience and stealth that had served him well during his military service, spending hours motionless in carefully chosen positions along deer trails. Cliff noted that Jerry's military training had given him advantages in camouflage and movement that most civilian hunters lacked. November 9th began with promising conditions for hunting. A light frost had fallen during the night, and the crisp air carried scents clearly while minimizing wind noise that might alert deer to the hunter's presence. Jerry and Cliff separated before dawn, with Jerry taking a position overlooking a known deer crossing, while Cliff moved to a different area of the hollow. At approximately 3:30 p.m., Jerry shot a young buck with his recurve bow. The arrow placement appeared good, but the deer ran after being struck, which was not uncommon behavior, even with lethal hits. Jerry waited the recommended 30 minutes before beginning to track the wounded animal, following the blood trail and broken vegetation that indicated the deer's path through the forest. Cliff heard Jerry's shout of excitement when the arrow found its mark, and he began moving toward Jerry's position to assist with tracking and field dressing the deer. The blood trail led through dense rhododendron thickets and across several small streams, requiring careful attention to avoid losing the sign. Jerry called out to Cliff periodically, indicating his location and the direction of the trail. The trail led into a narrow gulch that was choked with mountain laurel and fallen trees from previous storms. The terrain was treacherous, with loose rocks and steep drops that required careful footing. Jerry's final communication to Cliff came at approximately 4:15 p.m., when he reported that the blood trail was becoming more difficult to follow as daylight faded. When Jerry failed to respond to Cliff's calls after 30 minutes, Cliff began searching the gulch systematically. The dense vegetation and failing light made the search extremely difficult, and Cliff was forced to use his flashlight to examine the ground for tracks or other signs. He found several drops of deer blood on leaves and rocks, indicating that Jerry had been following the correct trail. Search and rescue teams arrived the following morning and conducted an intensive search of the area. On November 11th, searchers discovered Jerry's hunting pack, recurve bow, and boots neatly arranged under a large pine tree approximately half a mile from where Cliff had last heard his voice. The items appeared to have been placed deliberately rather than dropped or abandoned in panic. The discovery site showed no signs of struggle, animal attack, or foul play. Jerry's bow was unstrung and placed carefully beside his pack, which contained his hunting license, wallet, and personal effects. His boots were positioned side by side with his socks tucked inside, suggesting that he had removed them voluntarily. No blood evidence was found at the scene, and no tracks led away from the location. The search expanded to cover over 50 square miles of wilderness, involving local law enforcement, park rangers, and volunteer searchers from the community. Bloodhounds were brought in to follow Jerry's scent, but the dogs lost the trail at the same location where his equipment was found. Helicopter searches of the surrounding area failed to locate any additional evidence or sign of Jerry's whereabouts. Investigation revealed that Jerry had been dealing with recurring nightmares and flashbacks from his combat experience in Vietnam. Fellow veterans later came forward to describe conversations in which Jerry had expressed feeling overwhelmed by memories of war and struggling to readjust to civilian life. His wife mentioned that he had been increasingly withdrawn and had spoken about wanting to disappear into the mountains, where he felt most at peace. The search focused on the possibility that Jerry had suffered a psychological episode, possibly triggered by stress or disorientation in the failing light. The deliberate arrangement of his possessions suggested that he had made a conscious decision to leave his hunting gear behind. Searchers theorized that he might have continued deeper into the wilderness, perhaps seeking solitude or experiencing confusion related to his combat trauma. The official investigation concluded that Jerry Morton had likely suffered a mental health crisis that led him to abandon his equipment and venture deeper into the wilderness. The challenging terrain and extensive cave systems in the region made it possible that he had become lost or injured in an area that searchers could not access. Without additional evidence, the exact circumstances of his disappearance remained unclear. Cliff Danvers continued hunting in the Appalachian region but never returned to the Maplewood area. He reported that the experience had shaken his confidence in the wilderness he had known since childhood. Local hunters began mentioning Jerry's name before entering the woods, treating his disappearance as a cautionary tale about the mental health challenges that many veterans faced after returning from combat, and the importance of recognizing when someone might be struggling with psychological trauma.